The gloves felt heavier than usual as Sugar Ray Leonard stepped into the ring at Caesar's palace. The crowd's roar seemed distant, almost muffled, as if he were underwater. But it wasn't the noise that made his heart race. It was the man standing across from him. Muhammad Ali, the greatest of all time, was right there, close enough to touch during their sparring session. This wasn't just any training day. This was 1978, and Ray was still climbing the ladder, still proving himself worthy of the legendary status that seemed so far away. Ali, though past his prime, still carried that aura, that presence that made grown men question their own abilities. The bell rang and they moved toward each other like old friends meeting for coffee, except these friends wore 16-ounce gloves and had intentions of testing each other's limits. Ray had studied Ali's fights countless times, memorizing every shuffle, every rope-a-dope moment, every perfectly timed counter. But being in the ring with him was different. It was like studying a lion in a documentary versus standing face-to-face with one in the wild. They exchanged jabs, feeling each other out. Ali's movements were still fluid, still beautiful, even if the lightning speed had dimmed to mere mortal quickness. Ray tried to implement everything his trainer, Angelo Dundee, had taught him, every technique he'd perfected in the gym. But something felt off. He was fighting the legend, not the man. Then it happened. They clinched. In boxing, the clinch is supposed to be a moment of reset, a brief pause where fighters catch their breath and separate. But as Ray pressed against Ali's chest, something extraordinary occurred. He heard it. Ali's breathing. Not the labored gasps of an exhausted fighter, but something else entirely. It was controlled, rhythmic, almost meditative. Even in the heat of combat, even with Ray pressing against him, Ali's breathing remained steady, purposeful. But there was more. Ray could feel Ali's heartbeat through their pressed bodies, and it wasn't racing like his own. It was calm, measured, as if Ali were sitting in a rocking chair on a Sunday afternoon rather than engaged in combat with one of the most promising young fighters in the world. "You're thinking too much, young man," Ali whispered, so quietly that only Ray could hear. The words cut through all the noise, all the expectations, all the pressure Ray had been carrying. In that moment, Ray realized he'd been fighting Ali the legend instead of simply fighting. He'd been so focused on proving himself worthy of sharing the ring with greatness that he'd forgotten to simply be great himself. The breathing he heard wasn't just the sound of a relaxed fighter. It was the sound of someone who had found peace within chaos, someone who had learned to be present in the moment rather than lost in the magnitude of it. When they separated from the clinch, something had shifted in Ray's approach. His movements became more natural, more instinctive. He stopped trying to impress and started simply expressing his skills. The difference was immediate and profound. Ali noticed it too. "There you are," he said with that famous smile, dancing back as Ray landed a clean combination that surprised them both. The sparring session continued, but Ray was no longer the same fighter who had entered the ring 20 minutes earlier. He moved with a new confidence, a new understanding of what it meant to fight at the highest level. It wasn't about proving you belonged, it was about knowing you belonged and fighting from that place of certainty. After the session, as they sat on the ring apron removing their gloves, Ali looked at Ray with those knowing eyes. "You felt it, didn't you?" he asked. Ray nodded, still processing what had happened. "Your breathing. It was so calm. That's the secret, Ray. The fight isn't one with your hands or your feet. It's one with your mind, with your spirit. When you can breathe easy in the storm, that's when you become dangerous." If you're enjoying this incredible story of transformation and want to see how this moment changed Sugar Ray Leonard's entire approach to boxing, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think was going through Ray's mind in that clinch. Trust me, what happens next will blow your mind. The weeks following that sparring session were unlike anything Ray had experienced before. He found himself approaching training differently, fighting differently, even thinking about boxing in a completely new way. The lesson from Ali's breathing had unlocked something deep within him, something that would prove crucial in the battles ahead. Ray began incorporating meditation into his training routine, something that raised eyebrows in the rough-and-tumble world of 1970s boxing. While other fighters were focused solely on physical conditioning and technical drills, Ray was learning to control his breathing, to find that calm center that Ali had demonstrated in their clinch. His trainer, Angelo Dundee, noticed the change immediately. "What happened to you in there with Ali?" he asked after watching Ray spar with a completely different energy than before. "He taught me how to breathe," Ray replied, knowing how strange it sounded. But Angelo, being the wise trainer he was, understood. He'd seen fighters with all the physical tools in the world crumble under pressure because they couldn't control their minds. He'd also seen fighters with lesser physical gifts achieve greatness because they'd mastered the mental aspect of the sport. Ray's next fight was against a tough veteran named Pete Ranzani. Before the Ali encounter, Ray might have approached this fight with nervous energy, trying to prove himself with flashy combinations and risky moves. Instead, he entered the ring with that same controlled breathing he'd learned from Ali. From the opening bell, it was clear that something fundamental had changed. Ray moved with a fluidity and confidence that surprised even his own corner. He wasn't rushing, wasn't forcing anything. He was simply allowing his skills to flow naturally, breathing steadily throughout each round. In the sixth round, Ranzani caught Ray with a hard right hand that would have rattled the old Ray, would have made him panic and abandon his game plan. Instead, Ray took the shot, maintained his breathing, and responded with a perfectly timed counter that dropped Ranzani to the canvas. As Ranzani struggled to get back to his feet, Ray stood in the neutral corner, his breathing still controlled, still steady. He could hear Ali's voice in his head. "When you can breathe easy in the storm, that's when you become dangerous." The victory over Ranzani was just the beginning. Ray's new approach to fighting, rooted in that moment of understanding Ali's breathing, began to pay dividends in ways he never expected. His stamina improved because he wasn't wasting energy on tension and anxiety. His timing became more precise because he was present in each moment rather than thinking ahead to future rounds or dwelling on past mistakes. But perhaps most importantly, his confidence grew exponentially. The knowledge that he could remain calm under pressure, that he could breathe easy in the storm, gave him a psychological edge that proved invaluable as he faced increasingly difficult opponents. Word began to spread through the boxing community about Ray's transformation. Other fighters noticed the change, the way he carried himself, the unshakable calm he displayed even in the most heated exchanges. Some attributed it to natural maturation, others to improved training methods. But Ray knew the truth. It all traced back to that moment in the clinch with Ali, to the sound of controlled breathing in the midst of combat. The boxing world was about to witness the emergence of not just a great fighter, but a complete fighter, one who had learned to master both the physical and mental aspects of the sport. And it all began with learning how to breathe. Ray's rise through the welterweight ranks became meteoric after his revelation with Ali. Fight after fight, he displayed a level of composure and tactical intelligence that belied his years. Opponents who had expected to face a talented but inexperienced young fighter instead found themselves dealing with someone who seemed to have the wisdom of a veteran. The breathing technique became Ray's secret weapon, but it was more than just a calming mechanism. It became a way of reading his opponents, of staying connected to his instincts, of maintaining perfect timing even in the most chaotic moments of a fight. In his bout against Adolfo Virué, a crafty Puerto Rican fighter known for his ability to frustrate opponents with awkward angles and constant movement, Ray's new approach was put to the ultimate test. Virué was the kind of fighter who thrived on making his opponents uncomfortable, on forcing them out of their rhythm and into his chaotic style. But Ray's controlled breathing allowed him to stay centered throughout the fight. While Virué danced and moved and tried to create confusion, Ray remained anchored to his breath, to his calm center. He picked his shots carefully, never rushing, never forcing anything that wasn't there. In the 10th round, with the fight close on the scorecards, Ray found himself in another clinch. This time it was Virué who was breathing hard, whose heart was racing with the desperation of a fighter who knew he needed something special to win. Ray, meanwhile, maintained that same steady rhythm he'd learned from Ali. As they separated from the clinch, Ray saw his opening. Virué, exhausted from his constant movement and frustrated by his inability to break Ray's composure, dropped his guard for just a split second. Ray's left hook found its mark with devastating precision, ending the fight and announcing to the boxing world that a new force had arrived. After the fight, A reporter asked Ray about his remarkable composure under pressure. "It's all about breathing," Ray said with a smile that reminded many of Ali himself. "When you learn to breathe easy in the storm, everything else becomes possible." The boxing community began to take notice of Ray's unique approach to the mental side of fighting. Trainers started asking Angelo Dundee about Ray's methods. Young fighters began trying to incorporate breathing techniques into their own training. But most of them missed the deeper lesson that Ray had learned in that clinch with Ali. It wasn't just about breathing. It was about presence, about being fully in the moment rather than lost in the magnitude of it. It was about fighting the man in front of you rather than the reputation, the legend, or the fear in your own mind. As Ray prepared for his biggest test yet, a fight against the legendary Roberto Duran, he carried with him not just improved skills and conditioning, but a profound understanding of what it meant to be truly present in combat. The breathing technique had become second nature, but more importantly, the mindset behind it had become part of who he was as a fighter. The night before the Duran fight, Ray sat quietly in his hotel room practicing the controlled breathing that had become his trademark. He thought about that moment with Ali, about how a simple observation about breathing had transformed his entire approach to boxing. Tomorrow, he would step into the ring with one of the most feared fighters in the world, a man known for his ability to break opponents mentally before he broke them physically. But Ray felt ready, not because he was unafraid, but because he had learned to breathe easy in the storm. The fight with Roberto Duran would prove to be the ultimate test of everything Ray had learned from that moment with Ali. Duran was not just a fighter. He was a force of nature, a man who seemed to feed off his opponent's fear and uncertainty. He was exactly the kind of fighter who could expose any weakness in mental preparation. But as Ray made his way to the ring that night in Montreal, his breathing remained steady, controlled, purposeful. The crowd was electric, the atmosphere charged with anticipation for what many considered the fight of the decade. Yet Ray felt that familiar calm, that centered presence he'd discovered in the clinch with Ali. The opening rounds were brutal. Duran came forward with relentless pressure, throwing combinations with bad intentions, trying to impose his will through sheer force and intimidation. It was exactly the kind of storm that would have overwhelmed the old Ray, the fighter who existed before that transformative moment with Ali. But this Ray was different. Even as Duran's shots found their mark, even as the crowd roared and the pressure mounted, Ray's breathing remained controlled. He could feel Duran's desperation in their clinches, could sense the Panamanian's frustration as his usual intimidation tactics failed to break Ray's composure. In the 8th round, something shifted. Duran, accustomed to breaking his opponents by this point in the fight, found himself facing a man who seemed to grow calmer as the fight intensified. Ray's breathing technique had evolved beyond just a calming mechanism. It had become a way of reading the fight, of staying connected to his instincts even in the heat of battle. As they entered the championship rounds, it was Duran who began to show signs of desperation. His shots became wilder, less precise. His breathing became labored while Ray's remained steady. The student of Ali's breathing lesson was now teaching his own lesson about the power of mental composure. The final bell rang, and both fighters knew the fight was close. But Ray felt something he'd never experienced before in such a high-pressure situation: complete confidence in his performance. He had fought his fight, stayed true to his approach, and never allowed the magnitude of the moment to overwhelm him. When the decision was announced, a unanimous decision victory for Sugar Ray Leonard, it marked more than just a win over a legendary opponent. It was the culmination of a journey that began with a simple observation about breathing in a training session with Muhammad Ali. As Ray celebrated in the ring, he caught sight of Ali in the crowd, applauding with that knowing smile. Their eyes met for a moment and Ali nodded, a gesture of recognition from the master to the student who had learned the lesson well. Years later, when Ray would be asked about the key to his success, he would always return to that moment in the clinch with Ali. "He taught me that the fight isn't won with your hands," Ray would say. "It's won with your breath, with your presence, with your ability to stay calm in the storm." The breathing technique that Ray learned from Ali became legendary in boxing circles. Trainers began teaching it to their fighters. Sports psychologists studied it, and a new generation of boxers grew up understanding that mental preparation was just as important as physical conditioning. But for Ray, it was always more than just a technique. It was a philosophy, a way of approaching not just boxing but life itself. The lesson he learned in that clinch with Ali, that true strength comes from inner calm, that presence is more powerful than pressure, stayed with him long after he retired from the ring. The story of Sugar Ray Leonard's transformation is ultimately a story about the power of a single moment to change everything. In the space of one clinch, one observation about breathing, a good fighter became a great one. A talented athlete became a complete champion. And a young man learned a lesson that would serve him for the rest of his life. That's the incredible true story of how Muhammad Ali's breathing changed Sugar Ray Leonard's career forever. If this story inspired you as much as it inspired me, smash that subscribe button right now and hit the notification bell so you never miss another incredible story like this one. And I want to know, what's the most important lesson a mentor has ever taught you? Drop it in the comments below because your story might just inspire someone else to greatness. Remember, champions aren't born, they're made in moments like these. Until next time, keep breathing easy in your own storms.